Today, our mission is to unpack this fascinating presentation from Optimal IBM. It's called Entra ID Amplified.
Yeah, it's a great deck.
We are going to look at exactly how their platform, OptimalCloud, and something called the Virtual Identity Server, or VIS, act as an amplifier. They basically take that solid Microsoft baseline and stretch it into this infinitely extensible enterprise platform.
I mean, Entra ID is a very powerful baseline out of the box. No one is disputing that.
Right.
But when we look at the reality of modern enterprise IT, that baseline often has to connect with realities it simply wasn't architected to handle on its own.
Which is what we're getting into today. We're talking about eliminating massive maintenance burdens, completely bypassing some very specific Microsoft billing fees, and rethinking multi-factor authentication entirely.
I'm glad you brought up the architecture first,
Yeah.
actually, because before we even get to the flashy security features, we really have to talk about the plumbing.
Yeah, the plumbing is where the bodies are buried. If Entra ID is so powerful, why does it even need to be amplified in the first place?
Well, the need for amplification comes from the sheer complexity of legacy data. Think about the companies you work for. In standard setups, enterprises use sync tools like Entra Connect to pull their user data into Entra ID.
Which works fine if you have a perfectly clean single directory, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what happens when your company has acquired, say, 3 other companies in the last 5 years?
Oh, man.
You suddenly have hundreds of on-prem Active Directory forests, and each one has a different schema, different rules, and incredibly disjointed, messy data sources.
So Entra Connect just starts to buckle under the pressure. It's trying to force all those different puzzle pieces into one specific mold.
Yeah, it becomes a massive maintenance headache. Your IT team is constantly configuring, fixing, and managing those sync tools just to keep the baseline functioning.
Just to keep the lights on.
Right. They are manually intervening to resolve data conflicts. And this is where the Virtual Identity Server, the VIS, changes the architectural approach. It acts as an advanced routing system instead of just a brute force synchronization tool.
Okay, so in my head, I'm picturing VIS as this massive international air traffic controller.
Okay, I like that.
Like, instead of your engineering team trying to build 100 different runways for all these incoming planes from different legacy airports, which sounds like a recipe for a collision,
Yeah.
honestly, VIS sits in the tower.
Exactly.
It takes in all the flights from those hundreds of AD forests and disjointed sources, translates their approach paths perfectly, and then safely lands them on Microsoft's single runway. It feeds the data in 2 clean streams, right? One straight into Entra ID and one into Office 365.
That analogy hits on the core mechanism perfectly. Because VIS isn't creating a brand new massive database that you have to secure and manage.
Wait, really? It's not a database?
No, it's an intelligent router. It reads the data from where it lives, translates the protocol on the fly, and then presents it to Entra ID in the exact format it expects. So for the listener trying to picture the business impact here, achieving a zero-maintenance infrastructure on the back end is essentially the holy grail. OptimalCloud safely synchronizes those complex data sources while completely bypassing the maintenance headaches of standard sync tools.
That makes a lot of sense. You fix the plumbing so things flow, but that brings up a really crucial human element. Once VIS has sorted out the air traffic control for the data, someone still has to actually manage all the application connections. If you want to connect a new HR app or a legacy finance tool, an engineer still has to build that bridge.
Historically, yes. And this introduces what the presentation explicitly calls the DIY burden.
The DIY burden, just hearing that makes my eye twitch.
It's a very real pain point.
I bet. The sources mention endless manual configuration of SAML and OIDC protocols. For the listener who isn't buried in identity tech every day, why is configuring a SAML connection such a nightmare? It's not just flipping a switch, is it?
Not at all. Setting up a SAML connection security assertion markup language, it requires exchanging XML metadata between the application and your directory.
Sounds tedious.
It is. You have to configure specific assertion claims, map user attributes, and manage signing certificates. And those certificates expire.
Oh, right, the expiration dates.
So suddenly it's 2 a.m. on a Sunday, a certificate expires, your critical finance application goes down,
And your top-tier engineering talent is playing whack-a-mole with integration errors.
Exactly. You're burning incredibly expensive engineering hours on routine maintenance.
But the optimal approach contrasts this DIY burden with what they call the concierge service. Looking at these sources, they offer a 100% fully managed concierge experience.
Right. They maintain a staff of Federation experts who handle the troubleshooting, the integration, and the management of those non-compliant applications entirely.
And they boast over 12,000 native integrations. That's a huge number.
Over 12,000 native integrations, all maintained by their team. So your engineers don't touch the SAML metadata. They don't track certificate expirations. The Optimal team handles it to provide a seamless, single sign-on experience for your end users.
Okay, wait, I have to push back on this a little bit. They just do it for you. Is this basically outsourcing your identity IT?
What's a fair question?
Because identity is the perimeter now, right? Handing over the keys to the kingdom to a third party feels like a massive security leap for an enterprise.
That's the first question any chief information security officer is going to ask. And it highlights a crucial distinction between infrastructure and governance.
Okay, clarify that for me.
It's not about outsourcing your security. It's about shifting your operational resources.
Yeah.
You are removing the burden of managing the infrastructure. The optimal experts are acting as the plumbers, making sure the pipes connect securely.
Right.
But your internal enterprise team still controls the water. They are suddenly free to focus purely on managing security policy, governance rules, and business logic.
I see. You decide the policy of who gets to enter the building, but you're letting Optimal build the doors and change the locks.
That's it. You are retaining total control over access, but giving up the headache of making the access button work. And we see how valuable this is in multi-tenant realities, too.
Oh, like when a company has different cloud environments.
Exactly. Let's say your company has tenant A for Europe, tenant B for North America, and tenant C for a recent acquisition. OptimalCloud seamlessly provisions to all of those multiple tenants while the virtual identity server aggregates them.
Into a single unified administrative pane of glass, as the presentation calls it.
Yes.
So you aren't logging into 3 different dashboards with 3 different sets of credentials just to see what your employees are doing. VIS funnels that visibility into one view.
It dramatically reduces administrative fatigue.
Okay, saving engineering time and reducing fatigue is a huge win. But if we really want to get the attention of the executive team, we have to talk about saving money and scaling up.
Let's talk about the bottom line.
Because I'm looking at a slide in this presentation that honestly looks like a totally legal billing hack.
You're looking at the external identity slide.
I am. Microsoft charges what they call monthly active user, or MAU, billing for external users. If you have partners, B2B vendors, or B2C customers logging into your systems, those are external users.
And Microsoft charges you a premium for them if they pass a certain threshold.
But OptimalCloud completely bypasses this.
The mechanism for how they bypass it is brilliant in its simplicity, honestly. It all comes down to where you store the identities of those external users.
Okay.
You have to remember what Entra ID is primarily designed for. It's built for internal workforce management and deep integration with the Office 365 ecosystem.
But your external vendors and customers don't need a Microsoft Word license, right? They don't need an Exchange inbox. They just need secure access to a specific web portal or inventory application.
Exactly. So why pay Microsoft a premium to house them in an environment built for internal employees? The slide you're looking at shows the total user population splitting into 2 streams.
Like a fork in the road.
Right. The internal users go to Entra ID for their Office 365 access, but the external users, the B2B and B2C crowds, are routed to the OptimalCloud Universal Directory instead.
And right in the middle of the diagram is this massive red arrow pointing to $0 extra Microsoft MAU fees. Like, by hosting that external population within Optimal's Universal Directory, you simply sidestep the Microsoft licensing fees.
You bypass it entirely.
But if you do that, do those external users lose out on enterprise features? Like, is it a downgraded experience?
They don't. The Universal Directory still provides full self-service features for those users. You retain self-registration, password resets, and automated provisioning.
Oh, nice.
You keep the enterprise-grade identity lifecycle for the external users, but at a drastically reduced cost footprint because you aren't paying for features they will never touch.
That is a massive architectural win. But what about the scaling side? The presentation states, and I quote, "Rigid platforms force you to adapt your business logic to their limits."
Yes, this gets into the concept of limitless identity extensibility. Entra ID, the baseline, has a hard limit on the attributes you can assign to a user.
Right. Think about standard attributes: name, email, department manager, phone, location, just the basic HR file.
But modern enterprises have incredibly complex business logic that requires far more nuance.
And if you hit the attribute limit in a rigid platform, you're stuck building clunky workarounds. But Optimal uses something called a plugin framework injection to provide what they call infinite attribute scalability. And I have to call timeout here.
Sure.
Infinite sounds like marketing fluff. If I'm storing unlimited, constantly updating metadata on hundreds of thousands of users, doesn't that bloat the database and cause massive system lag?
That's a great technical catch, and the answer lies in how the framework is actually built. It isn't just adding an infinite number of columns to a giant flat spreadsheet.
So how does it work?
The plugin framework injection transforms the directory into a highly optimized relational web. It pulls dynamic data from external sources at the moment of authentication, without needing to permanently store every single data point in the core directory.
The example they give really clarifies this. They talk about auto-grouping retail users instantly based on specific subsidiary data stores.
Right.
So instead of just a flat attribute that says a user is in sales, the system can track that they are in sales at a specific subsidiary under a regional promotion code holding 3 specific active certifications.
Yes, and it instantly auto-groups them based on all those custom attributes pulling dynamically from different databases.
That is crazy.
That level of granularity is what allows you to automate business processes. The system knows the user's complete context in real time, so it can make access decisions automatically, rather than waiting for an IT ticket to clear.
Which naturally brings us to the most critical part of this entire deep dive. We've used this universal directory to bypass fees, which means we now have thousands of external vendors in our system. We have infinite attributes pulling from all over the place.
It's a lot of data.
That introduces massive risk. How does the system actually keep all of this locked down on a day-to-day basis?
This is where we see the philosophical shift from managing infrastructure to managing security. The presentation details intelligent group subscriptions and multi-step workflows. They refer to it as the gatekeeper protocol.
I love the gatekeeper protocol metaphor. Looking at the diagram, I'm picturing it like an incredibly strict VIP bouncer at an exclusive club.
That's exactly what it is.
It's not just, let me see your ID. It's a full background check. Let's walk through the Salesforce example they provided. Step 1 is the subscription request. The user walks up to the club and says, I want to get into the Salesforce room.
And step 2 introduces the VIS gatekeeper. This bouncer doesn't just look at the request. It examines the user's dynamic attributes that we just talked about. It applies a strict filter.
Okay.
In this example, the filter rule is department must equal sales or marketing.
So if the user's department attribute is HR or engineering, the VIS gatekeeper instantly blocks them. The request is denied at the door. The bouncer says, you're in HR, you have no business in the Salesforce room, goodbye.
Exactly. It never even touches the Azure provisioning side.
But if the user is in sales or marketing, they pass the filter. But the bouncer doesn't just open the door, right?
No, this is where the intelligent workflow takes over. Step 3 is a dual approval workflow. Even though the user meets the baseline criteria, the system now automatically routes a request to their manager for approval and to the group admin for approval.
That's wild. The bouncer checks your ID, texts your boss to make sure you're allowed to be out tonight, and then texts the guy inside the VIP room to make sure he actually wants you in there.
Perfect analogy. And only after both of those approvals are secured do we reach step 4, Azure provisioning. The user is then safely mapped to the Azure group.
Which keeps things super clean.
It ensures that your Entra ID environment remains pristine and that access is strictly governed by both algorithmic attribute logic and human oversight.
That handles the authorization for specific groups. But what about the actual moment the user tries to log in? Multi-factor authentication.
Right, MFA.
MFA is table stakes now, but Optimal's approach seems surprisingly robust out of the box. Like, they support the complete spectrum of device-bound and out-of-band methods.
We're talking passwordless options like Windows, Hello, biometrics like Face ID and Touch ID, FIDO2 security keys, push notifications, plus your standard options like time-based one-time passwords, and voice or SMS.
But the thing that really jumped out at me is their exclusive industry capability. OptimalCloud is the only vendor to support multi-factor authentication natively via Microsoft Teams messages.
Just huge.
It is. If you think about the daily life of an employee, they essentially live inside the Teams app all day long.
And the friction of standard MFA is a real productivity killer. You have to stop what you're doing, pick up your phone, unlock it, find the Authenticator app, and type in a 6-digit code before it expires.
With the Teams integration, the MFA prompt just pops up directly in the chat interface they are already staring at.
It drastically reduces friction for the end user while maintaining a highly secure encrypted channel.
But authentication only proves who the user is at that exact second. What happens when that user takes a 3-month leave of absence or, leaves the company entirely?
That brings us to automated identity lifecycle management. This is arguably the most critical security feature because it eliminates human error over time. The
Right.
lifecycle creates a closed loop of security. It starts with creation, which happens via SEI, self-registration, or an HR flat file.
Let's clarify SCM for the listener really quickly. System for Cross-Domain Identity Management. It's essentially an API standard that acts as an automated onboarding and offboarding checklist.
Yes.
It tells the system how to provision a user across 50 different apps instantly. So the user is created and they enter active use.
But then we hit the inactivity threshold. The system is constantly watching for behavioral anomalies. It detects if an account hasn't been used after a certain number of days.
Which is a huge red flag.
Leaving an inactive account sitting there is a massive vulnerability. It's a prime target for credential stuffing attacks by bad actors.
So instead of waiting for a manual audit every 6 months, the system takes automated action. It dispatches an automated warning email like, hey, you haven't logged in. Do you still need this?
And if there's no response, it executes the purge protocol. It either auto-disables the account or completely deletes it.
Just like that.
The loop is closed, the vulnerability is eliminated, and the IT team didn't have to lift a finger.
When you combine the gatekeeper, the team's MFA, and this lifecycle automation, this is exactly what they mean by start managing security. When you aren't spending hours provisioning and deprovisioning users manually, you are maintaining a hardened security posture automatically. Which all sounds incredible, assuming the system stays online. We have this massive automated system funneling data and enforcing complex security rules. But putting all your identity eggs in one basket can be terrifying. What happens if a cloud provider has a massive outage?
This is where real-time visibility and absolute resilience come into play. Optimal offers a 99.99% SLA guarantee.
4 nines. I have to play devil's advocate again here. 4 nines means you're promising less than an hour of downtime for the entire year. With the complexity of the internet, how can any vendor guarantee that?
They can guarantee it because of their architecture. To back that SLA up, they provide deep real-time auditing dashboards. You can see the VIS response time measured in milliseconds, active connections over the last hour, and total server CPU usage.
Okay, but what about the cloud itself?
The real safety net is their multi-cloud architecture. The sources state it is Azure and AWS cloud agnostic.
So if Microsoft Azure has a massive regional outage, Optimal Cloud keeps the lights on because the underlying infrastructure can instantly lean on Amazon Web Services.
That multi-cloud agnostic architecture ensures ultimate resilience against single-vendor outages. If Azure goes down, your identity routing doesn't go down with it.
Yeah.
The VIS infrastructure is distributed. Your users can still authenticate and access any critical applications that are hosted elsewhere and still online.
That is massive for enterprise risk mitigation. So what does this all mean for you and your company? The presentation wraps up with what they call the extension matrix, and I think it perfectly synthesizes the stark contrast between standard Entra ID native and Entra ID amplified by Optimal Cloud. Let's look at the philosophy here.
With app integration, Entra ID Native leaves you with DIY configuration. You're managing the SAML certificates. Optimal gives you a 100% managed concierge.
For external user storage, native means your costs scale with every vendor you add due to MAU billing. Optimal shifts them to a universal directory for 0 extra Microsoft fees.
For administration, native is basic and flat. Optimal provides granular attribute level and relationship managers through that plugin framework.
For identity routing, native requires ongoing maintenance of sync tools like Entra Connect. Optimal utilizes the zero maintenance VIS router, our air traffic controller.
Group subscriptions in native are generally open and unfiltered. Optimal deploys dynamic filters and dual approvals, your VIP bouncer.
And finally, while native offers standard MFA, Optimal offers the full spectrum, including that incredibly frictionless Teams integration. It's a complete paradigm shift from doing the heavy lifting yourself to having a platform that absorbs the labor.
Which brings us to the final slide and really the core thesis of this presentation. Stop managing infrastructure. Start managing security.
I love that.
Optimal Cloud and VIS don't just amplify Entra ID, they liberate IT teams from the mundane plumbing. No application management, no certificate management, no Entra Connect maintenance.
Which leaves you with a pretty massive question to ponder as we wrap up. If an enterprise completely hands over its app integration, its identity plumbing, and its infrastructure maintenance to a fully managed concierge service.
That's big.
Exactly. What new advanced security initiatives or massive business innovations could those newly freed up engineering teams tackle with all those reclaimed hours?
When your best minds aren't untangling legacy cables, they can finally build the future of the business.
They finally get to walk out of that messy tech closet, shut the door forever, and actually get to work. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.